Kenichi is your regular overworked Japanese salaryman, living off caffeine and dreams of early retirement. One day, while drowning in spreadsheets, he finally keels over. But instead of getting an epic isekai send-off, he wakes up and retires to a quiet farm. Life's chill until one day, poof, he's making lunch, and now he's in a forest. Looking around, he finds a skeleton, yikes, and some weird plants. Years of binge-watching anime tell him this is probably an isekai moment. Just to be sure, he yells, "Status window!" And boom, there it is. "Welcome to the game, Kenichi." His status screen looks good, but there's no HP bar. Suspicious. But hey, his Amazon account is still active. Turns out he can shop and hoard things in his item box. The downside? He's broke. The only thing of value nearby is the shiny armor on Mr. Skeleton Knight and, well, finders keepers, right? Kenichi grabs the gear, buys bread, and buries the skeleton like a decent human being. As he pedals through the forest, night falls. And surprise, wolves show up, not the fluffy kind. Kenichi panics. No guns in the store? Seriously? So he settles for fireworks. The wolves are startled, but they're not leaving. And that's when it hits him. Sometimes life throws wolves at you, but remember, every challenge is just training for your next victory. Plan B, he buys a slingshot. Turns out, these slingshot balls pack a punch. A couple of wolves get KO'd, and the rest peace out. Kenichi hops on his bike and escapes into the night like a budget action hero. By morning, he's out of Wolfland, but still lost. So he buys a ladder and a telescope because why not, and climbs a tree. From up there, he spots a city in the distance. Finally, civilization. As he starts pedaling toward the city, a cart nearly mows him down. The driver, a merchant named Fuyo, feels bad and offers him a ride. Kenichi hops in and meets another passenger in the back, a quiet, mysterious woman. While riding, Fuyo couldn't help but comment on Kenichi's odd outfit. Curious, he asked what brought him to the city. Kenichi replied he was planning to start a business there. They eventually arrived at the city gates, and Fuyo kindly dropped Kenichi off in front of his store. As a thank you, Kenichi handed Fuyo a pouch of pepper, but Fuyo's reaction wasn't what he expected. With a serious tone, Fuyo warned Kenichi not to sell pepper here. The spice mafia, Baikoba, ran the whole market and didn't take kindly to competition. If Kenichi tried, they might send their notorious Boeing assassin after him. Kenichi was floored. Who knew selling spices could be a death sentence? Still, he appreciated the heads up. Fuyo, knowing this was a private deal, decided to buy the pepper himself. Kenichi tried to wave him off, but Fuyo insisted. "A merchant never takes something for free," he said. Kenichi understood and accepted the payment, though he was shocked by how much Fuyo gave him. He had only paid 1,000 yen for the pepper, but received the equivalent of 100,000 yen in return. After parting ways, Kenichi wandered the town and stumbled across a cozy inn and restaurant. The hostess, Azalea, greeted him warmly, and he asked about lodging. She quoted him 1 copper coin for a room, payment up front. Kenichi handed over the money, but when asked to sign his name, he hit a snag. He couldn't write in this world's language. Azalea noticed his peculiar outfit and guessed he might be a foreign ambassador. Kenichi clarified he was just here to start a business. She was supportive but skeptical, noting that the Merchant Guild required literacy and math skills. Kenichi reassured her he was fine with numbers, but admitted the language was new to him. To test his claim, Azalea quizzed him on some basic multiplication. Kenichi nailed it, proving he was a math whiz in this world. Impressed, Azalea offered to help him write his name. Kenichi then asked if she'd teach him the language in exchange for candy. The mention of sweets sealed the deal. Candy was a rare luxury, and Azalea was thrilled. After a sugar-fueled excitement, she got to work teaching him. The language turned out to be similar to Japanese katakana, and Kenichi picked it up quickly. Within hours, he could read and write fluently. Azalea was amazed by his skills and even started seeing him as marriage material. Kenichi brushed it off, laughing, as he felt too old for her. Before the night ended, Kenichi sketched a portrait of Azalea, which blew her away. Portraits were usually reserved for nobles, so this was a big deal. In return, she impulsively jumped on him. Let's just say Kenichi's first night in town got interesting. The next morning, Kenichi visited the Merchant Guild to register. After filling out some forms, he paid the registration fee in installments. 1 silver total, equivalent to 50,000 yen. With his new ID stick in hand, he officially became a merchant. He spent the rest of the day exploring the market, taking note of prices. Manufactured goods were pricey, but food was affordable, so he grabbed a bag of fruit to kickstart his plans. The next day, Kenichi got busy setting up a stall to sell his goods. Azalea, watching him work, was amazed at how quickly and efficiently he built it. As Kenichi hung up some flyers, she noticed something unusual. Clothespins. Their design caught her attention. Turns out, clothespins in this world were flimsy wooden things held together by rubber bands and were practically useless. Azalea asked if Kenichi was selling them too. He hadn't even thought about it, but her excitement gave him a light bulb moment. These simple clothespins might just be a hit. Later, Kenichi headed to the market for his first day as a merchant. He found a cozy spot next to an old lady named Anama and asked if she minded him setting up there. She didn't, so Kenichi pulled out his stall from his item box. That alone left Anama impressed, but her eyes lit up when she spotted the clothespins. She decided to buy a few. Kenichi, surprised, asked why she'd support a competitor. Anama chuckled, saying there's no rule against it, and she wasn't interested in any rivalry. As the day went on, Kenichi's stall started drawing attention. Customers loved his goods, especially the sturdy clothespins. They were such a hit that Kenichi thought he could probably make a living off them. Still, he knew others might start copying his design eventually, so he couldn't rely on them forever. Then a man approached Kenichi's stall. From his sword and fancy clothes, it was clear this guy was a noble. He asked to see one of Kenichi's knives. After testing it and being impressed with the sharpness, he asked for the price. 2 silver, Kenichi said. It wasn't cheap, but the noble understood the quality. He was tempted, but mentioned he needed something a bit longer. Kenichi rummaged through his inventory and found a katana. The noble's eyes practically sparkled at the sight of it, but when Kenichi told him the price, 1 gold coin, the man hesitated. That was no small amount, and he stood there trying to convince himself it was worth it. While this was happening, a cat girl suddenly showed up, sniffed Kenichi's face, and even licked him. Startled, Kenichi quickly realized she was a beast folk, the first he'd ever seen. Once he got over his initial shock, he asked what she wanted to buy. The cat girl and her companions pointed at the cloths Kenichi had used to cover his stall. He hadn't planned to sell them, but business is business. He offered them a deal. 3 cloths for just 1 copper each. Unfortunately, the beast folk were terrible at math and thought Kenichi was trying to scam them. Luckily, the noble stepped in, assuring them Kenichi was being honest. Relieved, they bought the cloths. The noble also decided to splurge on the katana, unable to resist its craftsmanship. By the end of the day, Kenichi had made a hefty profit. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a maid who had bought Kenichi's clothespins excitedly showed them to her master, Primula, and asked if they can start using them in the mansion since they'd make her chores so much easier. Primula agrees. It's a great idea. In fact, it's such a good idea that she tells Margaret to buy more tomorrow. But then, a light bulb goes off in Primula's head. Why just use them when she could sell them through her own company? These clothespins are a gold mine waiting to happen. Fired up, she dashes off to get her father's approval for the plan. Meanwhile, Kenichi is by the well, taking a chilly bath and shivering like a wet dog. He dreams of soaking in a hot bath, but quickly remembers this world doesn't have them yet. If he wants one, he'll have to invent it himself. He searches through his online store inventory and finds a barrel for sale. Perfect. His plan? Fill the barrel with water, stick it over a fire, and voila, instant hot bath. If it works, he might even turn this idea into another business. While he's benefiting a lot from his mysterious online store, he can't help but wonder how it all works. Where do these packages even come from? Is there some cosmic Amazon Prime service delivering them? He half jokes that his soul might be the payment, but hey, no point stressing over it now. With that thought, he decides to call it a night. But while Kenichi is drifting off, somewhere deep in the forest, a little girl named Enemon is running for her life. The next day, Kenichi decides to mix things up at his shop by adding some jewelry to the inventory. They're not real gems or anything fancy, just polished glass. But they sparkle enough to catch attention. Hopefully, they'll bring in some extra coins. While he's setting up, Margaret, the maid from yesterday, shows up again. She's back for more clothespins. When Kenichi asks how many she wants, she casually says, 100? Kenichi nearly drops his jaw, but quickly recovers. Money is money, after all. As he packs up the order, Margaret notices the shiny glass jewelry and asks if they're real diamonds. Kenichi chuckles and explains they're just polished glass, but they do look nice. Margaret nods and tells him to hold one for her. She'll come back for it later. Business goes smoothly for most of the day, but as Kenichi is packing up, the beast folk from yesterday show up again. They look super serious, which makes Kenichi worry they're here to settle some grudge. But Mylon, the cat girl, leans in close, sniffs, and announces to the group, "Yep, I smell spices." The beast folk get excited and beg Kenichi to sell them some spices. Kenichi hesitates, remembering the scary rumors about the spice syndicate. He's not about to paint a target on his back, so he politely refuses. The locals around them chime in, saying it's unfair to ask a new merchant like Kenichi to take such a big risk. The beast folk seem to understand and back off. But Kenichi has an idea. He might not be able to sell spices, but he can still share a meal. He invites the beast folk to join him for dinner, out in the woods, away from prying eyes. The beast folk happily agree, and later that evening they meet up with Kenichi and the old merchant, Anima, on the outskirts of town. As they prepare the meal, Anima offers to help and gets tasked with cutting veggies. She's amazed at how fresh and vibrant the vegetables are. Kenichi explains they're imported from a foreign country and are top-notch. Meanwhile, Mylon and the other beast folk are in the river, catching fish like pros. With all the ingredients ready, Kenichi gets to work. He seasons the fish with spices, throws everything into a pot, and soon enough, the aroma of a delicious meal fills the air. When it's done, the beast folk dig in and are blown away. They've never tasted anything this good before and can't stop thanking Kenichi. However, all this amazing food has triggered a craving for alcohol. The beast folk exchange hopeful glances. Anama tells the group to chill out because alcohol is expensive, but Kenichi figures a little drink won't hurt. He pulls out a cheap bottle of booze and pours a few glasses. In exchange, he makes them promise to keep their mouths shut about the secret dinner he made. Anama thinks Kenichi's being overly generous, but he shrugs it off. The beast folk seem like decent folks, so why not let them enjoy a good meal and some drinks? That night, they eat, drink, and even take a quick dip in the nearby stream before crashing under the stars. Somewhere in the mix, Mayuri seems to be warming up to Kenichi, maybe a bit too much. The next morning, Kenichi strolls back to the inn only to find Azalea giving him the stink eye. Kenichi explains he was hanging out with some beast folk, but the stray fur on his jacket makes her suspicious. "A cat lady? Really? Couldn't you have at least picked me?" she huffs. Later, Kenichi opens his shop for another day of business. Before long, Margaret shows up again, but this time she's brought someone along, Primula. Kenichi's momentarily distracted by Primula's beauty, but he snaps out of it when Margaret reminds him about the necklace she wanted. Kenichi pulls it out and Margaret pays for it before handing it to Primula to inspect. Primula is so impressed by the quality that she can't believe it's not made of real diamonds. She asks if Kenichi has more. Lucky for her, Kenichi restocks his inventory and brings out a fresh batch. Primula is clearly impressed, not just with the jewelry but also with Kenichi's mysterious item box that stores everything. She then drops a surprise. She's the daughter of the owner of the Mallow Trading Company and wants Kenichi to meet her father. Kenichi is intrigued but a bit nervous. Meeting big-shot merchants sounds like a recipe for trouble. Anima reassures him, saying Primula's father has a solid reputation. Convinced, Kenichi agrees, and Primula invites him to ride with her in her fancy carriage. On the way, Primula shows him clothespin replicas her craftsman tried making. While the wooden part was easy, the metal spring was too tricky for them to replicate. Kenichi sympathizes. Even he doesn't know how the springs are made, though he guesses it's some kind of complicated process. They arrive at Primula's mansion, and Kenichi is blown away by its size. Primula laughs it off, saying it's modest compared to noble estates. Inside, Kenichi meets Mallow, her father. After some greetings, they get down to business. Kenichi shows Mallow some of his jewelry, and Mallow is just as impressed as his daughter. When he learns Kenichi also has an item box, Mallow is even more intrigued. He reveals that his own item box helped him build the Mallow Trading Company, and believes Kenichi could achieve similar success if he uses it wisely. Mallow then proposes making Kenichi the official supplier for his company. Kenichi, half expecting this, asks why Mallow doesn't just buy from his shop and resell. Mallow admits he could've, but that's a sneaky move, and he'd rather build a direct partnership to stay ahead of his competitors. Mallow offers Kenichi 50% of the retail price for his goods. Kenichi could negotiate for more, but he's already making absurd profits from his online store, so he accepts the deal. They shake hands, seal the partnership, and sign the contract. Kenichi's first few supplies make him over 1 million yen in coins, and business is booming. Meanwhile, Primula can't stop admiring Kenichi's jewelry and asks her father if she can buy a few pieces for herself. Mallow just chuckles and agrees. After all, it's not every day his daughter is this excited. Primula offers to pay Malice 10 gold coins for the items, which is about 2 million yen. For the first time since arriving in this world, Kenichi's bank balance hits 8 figures. Feeling like a king, he decides it's time to set up his peaceful dream life and buys a house from his online store. The next day, Kenichi heads outside the city walls into the forest to find the perfect spot for his new home. Before leaving, he tells Azalea about his plan so she doesn't freak out. But she's puzzled. Why would anyone choose this scary forest over a cozy city, she asks. Kenichi just shrugs it off. After some wandering, he finds a great spot and gets to work. Step 1. Clearing the area. He buys a weed whacker and starts landscaping, only to realize that, just like back on Earth, fuel is ridiculously expensive. Grumbling about the cost, he powers through until he clears a nice path to the forest. Next up, the trees. Kenichi buys a chainsaw and spends hours cutting them down. By the end, he's got a pile of logs but runs into a problem. These massive trees won't fit in his item box, so he pulls out his chainsaw again and cuts them into 10-meter logs. Finally, they fit, but the sun is setting and there are still tree stumps everywhere. Exhausted, he calls it a day. The next morning, Kenichi tackles the stumps. After some digging, he realizes, I'm way too old for this back-breaking stuff. So he buys a backhoe for over 1 million yen. At first he regrets spending so much money just to avoid manual labor, but then again he reasons, work smarter, not harder. Excited, he fires up the backhoe and realizes it runs on diesel. His store doesn't sell diesel, and panic sets in. After some brainstorming, he decides to make his own diesel using kerosene and additives. To test his concoction, he uses a small diesel generator. It works! Relieved, he plans to finish the job the next day. In the meantime, Kenichi decides to deal with the forest's pesky bugs. He heads to a local magic shop for some bug-repellent magic stones. The shopkeeper, a wizard, greets him warmly and asks about his origins. Kenichi explains he's a foreigner who just set up shop in town. The wizard offers the stones for 3 silver coins, which feels like a ripoff to Kenichi. Thinking quickly, Kenichi pulls out 2 oranges and offers them instead. The wizard, who's never seen oranges before, assumes they're rare and agrees to the trade. Later, Anima tells Kenichi the wizard is a great guy to befriend, unlike Shaga, a wanted criminal whose posters are plastered all over town. Shaga, the leader of a notorious bandit group, is causing chaos. That night, he organizes a raid on a carriage transporting slaves. Whatever his plans are, they can't be good. The next day, Kenichi heads back into the forest, eager to finally use his backhoe. As soon as he starts it up, he's grinning like a kid with a new toy. Not only is it making his work easier, but it's a lot of fun too. For a moment, he feels like nothing can stop him from achieving his dream of a peaceful life in the woods. Then he remembers his wallet. He's almost broke after buying the backhoe. So, any big plans for construction will have to wait. Hoping to make some quick cash, Kenichi visits Malo and Primula to sell them salt and sugar. Malo tries the sugar and loves it, but there's a catch. The state controls all salt and sugar sales, so he can't buy it without risking trouble. Bad news, right? But there's good news too. Those jewels Kenichi sold earlier are flying off the shelf. Malo immediately buys more, and Kenichi earns 15 gold coins, roughly 3 million yen. Now he has enough to buy the log cabin he found in his store. Kenichi can't believe his store actually sells a whole cabin, and for only 1.7 million yen, it's a deal too good to pass up. But when he buys it, he doesn't get a pre-assembled house. Nope, he gets buried in a pile of wood planks and a manual that might as well be written in hieroglyphs. After reading the instructions and regretting his life choices, Kenichi starts building. Luckily, the beast folk from before happened to pass by and offer to help as a thank you for his kindness earlier. Weeks fly by, and thanks to the beast folk's help, the cabin starts to come together. Kenichi keeps his stall open while chipping away at construction. After nearly a month of teamwork, the cabin is finished. To show his gratitude, Kenichi throws a barbecue party for his new friends. But the work isn't over yet. Kenichi still has to paint the walls, finish the roof, and figure out how to generate electricity. It takes another month of effort, but he finally gets everything sorted. He builds a fence, sets up a farm, and installs solar panels for electricity. Now his home is fully self-sufficient. To celebrate, Kenichi takes a long, warm bath. The only downside? He doesn't have indoor plumbing yet, so he had to bike back and forth to fill the tub. Still, it's a victory. The next morning, Kenichi visits Azalia at the inn to share the good news. "I'm done with the cabin, so I won't be staying here anymore," he says. Azalia is surprised. She didn't think he was serious about living in the forest. But she's happy he reached his goal, even if she'll miss seeing him around. The day after that, Kenichi wakes up in his cozy cabin. The weather is perfect, so he grabs his camera and heads out to snap photos of the local flowers. Everything is peaceful until an arrow whizzes past him. Startled, Kenichi falls off his bike. More arrows follow and he dives behind a tree for cover. Turns out the archers are a group of new beast folk living in the forest. They were out hunting and mistook Kenichi for prey. Kenichi is completely confused about why these beast folk are attacking him. But he's not the type to just sit there and take it, so he grabs his slingshot from his inventory and returns fire. The beast folk are a bit taken aback. They weren't expecting this weak human to fight back. They start second-guessing their life choices as Kenichi throws some fireworks at them and pulls out his excavator. It's the beast folk, clearly not ready for whatever this excavator can do. Bolt. Kenichi is left standing there, scratching his head, wondering what just happened. But just as he's about to figure it out, he hears a cry for help. A wounded animal at the base of a tree. It's a cat with an arrow in its leg, and it's clearly in a lot of pain. Kenichi moves in to help, but the cat isn't having it. It hisses and bares its teeth, not trusting him one bit. Kenichi doesn't want to risk a bite, so he spends a little money to buy some cushion armor, just in case, and he tries to remove the arrow. The cat barely puts up a fight. Guess it's too tired to do anything. With the cat calmer, Kenichi disinfects the wound with some alcohol and applies some antibiotic cream. It's a good start, but he's still not sure if the poor thing will make it out here in the wild, so he decides to take it back to his place. So once home, he sets up a blanket for the cat, but it hasn't moved a muscle since he treated it. Kenichi starts to worry. He hasn't seen any vets around, but maybe there's some healing magic he can use. So he heads to ask the local wizard. The wizard listens to his story, and after realizing Kenichi found a bobcat, he's a bit confused. Why would Kenichi want to help it? He could have just killed it and sold its fur for a nice profit. Since the wizard's not much help, Kenichi heads outside. That's when Miley pops up out of nowhere, sniffing him like a bloodhound. She picks up the scent of the bobcat on him and goes absolutely bonkers. Her people see bobcats as messengers of God, so she's totally excited and wants to see it. She follows Kenichi to his house and immediately spots the injury caused by the dog beast folk. Miley is not having it. She vows to make them pay. Meanwhile, the bobcat seems to be doing a bit better, but it keeps trying to lick its wound. Kenichi, being the problem solver he is, puts a cone on the cat's head to stop it. Miley's impressed by Kenichi's healthcare skills and asks if he's a doctor. Kenichi laughs and says he's just good with first aid. To thank him for helping the bobcat, Miley goes hunting for some bird meat and she returns with her catch. Kenichi cooks it up for dinner. Miley's wiped out and asks if she can crash at Kenichi's place for the night. Kenichi raises an eyebrow. Is it okay for you to skip work? But Miley's more concerned about the bobcat than anything else. Kenichi agrees to let her stay. But since he only has one bed, Miley suggests they share it. And, well, things get a bit cozy, with Miley ending up on top of Kenichi that night. And several days later, the bobcat's doing a lot better, so Kenichi decides to work on his farm. He's already got the tools and seedlings, but he's still got a big problem. Water, running to the river. Every time he needs to water crops is a pain. He starts thinking about how to solve this and figures he can build a well with a pump. But that's a job for tomorrow. He's too tired to deal with it today. After going to bed, he wakes up the next morning to find the bobcat jumping on his stomach. It hurts, but Kenichi's happy to see the cat's full of energy again. He takes off the cone and sends the bobcat back into the wild to live its life. Now back to that well. Kenichi decides to take a break from his shop and spend a few days building it. He drills a hole in the ground and installs an electric pump. So now he's got fresh water anytime he needs. Now to celebrate, he starts filling up the bath for a nice soak. But just as he's about to jump in, he hears someone call his name. It's Primula, looking surprised to find him here. She explains that she got worried since he hadn't opened his shop today. Miley told her about his cabin, so she decided to check on him. She's impressed by everything Kenichi has built on his own, but then her eyes land on the giant excavator next to his house. She's curious. What's that? Kenichi doesn't want to explain how his excavator works, so he shrugs and says, "It's my summoned familiar." Primula surprisingly buys it. Now she thinks Kenichi knows magic. He quickly asks her to keep it a secret. But there's a small issue. By this time, the city gates are closed, so Primula can't head home tonight. Primula already knew that, which is why she casually declares she's staying over. Kenichi mentions he only has one bed, but she just waves it off. Then she notices a barrel nearby and asks about it. Kenichi explains it's his hot bath setup, and Primula's eyes light up like a kid in a candy store. By nightfall, Kenichi has the bath ready and Primula hops in, loving the warmth. But being in the woods creeps her out a little, so she starts calling for Kenichi. He shouts back, "I'm right here, on the other side of the wall." But Primula insists she'd feel safer if she could see him. After her bath, Kenichi hands her a fluffy bathrobe. She's so impressed with how cozy it feels that she asks if she can buy it. Kenichi says it's not for sale, but after a bit of pleading, he gives in and promises to sell her a couple. Later, he hands her a nightgown for bed. Primula is blown away by Kenichi's collection of amazing products and tells him he could become the kingdom's greatest merchant. Kenichi laughs and says he's not interested in fame. The attention from nobles would only complicate his peaceful life. Primula promises to help him keep things quiet. When it's time to sleep, Kenichi doesn't want another Miley situation, so he buys a second bed for Primula. Meanwhile, trouble is brewing elsewhere. Over in the outlaws' camp, Shaga receives a job from someone important. This could spell danger later. The next morning, Kenichi takes Primula home. While there, he discusses the bathrobes with Mallow, who thinks they'll sell like hotcakes. Since they're on the topic, Kenichi jokingly suggests selling something a bit spicy. Primula seems curious, but Mallow shuts that down immediately. Just then, Margaret arrives with some ledgers for Mallow. Seeing Kenichi's curiosity, Mallow explains he's rewriting the old ledgers using a new system called double-entry bookkeeping. Kenichi is surprised. It's the same system he knew in Japan. This reminds him of Mallow's earlier comment about the Empire's rapid progress thanks to a certain inventor. Mallow invites Kenichi to see one of the latest inventions, a pitcher pump. Kenichi's suspicion deepens. Creating a pitcher pump so easily would require knowledge from Japan. Could there be someone else like him here? And if so, that means competition. Over the next few days, Primula visits Kenichi often, but tonight is special. She's preparing for a supply run tomorrow and won't be able to visit for a while. Before leaving, she asks about the spicy nightgown and if she can buy it. Kenichi teases her, asking if she's trying to seduce someone, and Primula cheekily replies, "Yes, you." Kenichi is stunned. He doesn't think it's a good idea to start a relationship with her, especially since he's friends with Mallow. But Primula assures him her father has already given his blessing. Even so, Kenichi says he's too busy for romance right now and asks if they can put the topic on hold. Primula understands, but asks if she can share his bed just once, even if it's just to sleep. The next morning, Kenichi gets an unexpected visitor, a knight named Norseball, the same guy who bought a sword from him earlier. Norseball explains he was sent to investigate rumors of a strange old man living in the woods, but assures Kenichi that he'll report back that there's nothing suspicious here. Before leaving, Norseball mentions some recent gossip. A mage in the Empire created a condiment called mayonnaise and even defeated a dragon with it. Kenichi is floored. It's clear that this mage must also be from Japan. With everything this mysterious person has achieved, Kenichi can't help but feel a little outclassed. And that wraps up episode 3. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part. A month later, in the bustling city market, Kenichi was waiting for Mallow's caravan, probably hoping for free snacks. When he overheard rumors of an attack, his curiosity piqued, but things took a serious turn when Margaret arrived, looking like she'd just been through a bad breakup. She confirmed that trouble was brewing. Kenichi pushed through the crowd and found Mallow on his knees, begging adventurers to save his daughter. The problem? Shaga, a ruthless bandit leader with 50 goons, had her. The guild promised help in a few days, but Mallow, desperate and frantic, needed action now. Meanwhile, Primula, Mallow's daughter, sat calmly in her cell, seemingly unaffected by her captivity. Even Shaga, a gross creep, couldn't help but admit her beauty would tempt the pervy nobles to take good care of her. Back in the city, Mallow, pleading with Kenichi, threw himself at his feet. Kenichi had a sudden flashback of Primula, maybe out of guilt, maybe stupidity, but he impulsively agreed to help. The moment the words left his mouth, he realized this wasn't a side quest. It was a full-on war, and he was just the errand boy. But hey, he had the Shangri-La, his mysterious virtual store. Kenichi pulled a fast one, demanding an advance payment. Mallow, desperate and rich, handed over 10 million yen. Not bad for a day's work. Shaga's hideout was a ruined mountain castle, 50 k's south. Kenichi needed a ride, so he opened his store and summoned a Yatsubichi gallop truck right in the middle of town. People stared as he announced that his horse-free iron chariot would take willing warriors to battle, complete with top-tier weapons. Oh, and there was a huge bounty on Shaga's head. Yet, no one signed up. Apparently, even money couldn't convince adventurers to risk getting chopped up by bandits. Then came Lynx-chan, the badass feline Kenichi had saved a month ago, proudly hopping onto the truck with a pigeon in her mouth, ready for action. And she wasn't alone. Miley and her beastfolk warriors Nakoro, Nyamelo, and Maelanji joined the crew, ready to take on Shaga's gang. Kenichi handed out high-tech weapons, and Miley nearly drooled over her new bow. Next, Norseball, the knight, showed up with a brand new Great Wolf Fang sword. One Kenichi's store had supplied. The knight was way too excited to test out his new weapon, and Kenichi wasn't about to argue with someone wielding such a badass blade. An old geezer from the tool shop also appeared. Kenichi tried to shoo him away, but the guy flexed his fireball magic, proving he wasn't just here to hand out walking sticks. And then Inama showed up, demanding a seat on the truck. Kenichi tried to explain it wasn't a picnic, but she insisted she'd cook and be ready to run if things got dicey. Kenichi, not wanting to waste any more time, pulled her on board. He called for one last round of recruits, but no one joined. The crowd seemed more interested in calling it a scam than fighting bandits. With his ragtag team ready, Kenichi told Mallow to stay home. No need for a dramatic reunion until Primula was safe. He took the Hunt Shaga mission at the Adventurers Guild, paid a silver coin, and officially registered the mission. And just like that, Kenichi and his crew rolled out, leaving town in disbelief, some even accusing them of running off with Mallow's money. But they didn't know. This wasn't a scam. This was war. Meanwhile, Primula sat in her dingy cell when the door creaked open, expecting a guard. Instead, a tiny purple-hazed girl entered, clutching a piece of bread like it was the last slice at a frat party. Primula, being the only adult in the room, handed her the food. At first, the girl hesitated, but hunger won out, and she devoured the bread like someone at 2 a.m. after a night of bad decisions. Pramila realized the girl was a prisoner too. She reassured her, "Don't worry, help is coming." The girl, wide-eyed and hopeful, asked, "You mean like God's help?" Pramila just nodded, not wanting to crush the kid's spirit. Meanwhile, Kenichi and the team made camp, cooking vegetable soup with horned rabbit meat. The beast folk, naturally curious, got a little too interested in the cat food Kenichi had bought for Lynx. Despite it being cat food, the merchant let them try it. Even the wizard took a bite. The dinner disaster was officially underway. Later, Kenichi laid out the plan. The smart ones, Merciful and the mage, agreed with him. The beast folk admitted they weren't exactly the brains of the operation, so they just nodded along. Inama, however, flat out refused to fight. She was there to make sure the fire didn't go out. Then, Meili, who was still getting used to modern technology, nearly had a heart attack when she heard a voice out of nowhere from a communicator. Kenichi found it hilarious and told her to get used to it. When it was go time, Meili scouted ahead. She saw that the castle guards were all drunk, happily partying around bonfires. Kenichi, seeing the opportunity, popped a battle snack from the beast folk, a mysterious nut that tasted like raw regret. This was when things got strange. Kenichi, high as a kite from the snack, lost his mind and laughed uncontrollably, driving toward the castle as if he were playing Mario Kart. Inside the castle, the drunk guards were oblivious to the impending doom. Meili, always sharp, took down 2 guards with ease. The rest of the crew followed, and the old wizard blew the gate wide open with a massive explosion. It was time to invade. Kenichi's truck barreled into the courtyard, and the team jumped out, weapons ready, catching the bandits completely off guard. But Kenichi? He was flailing around like a drunk at his first bar fight. Then, just when a bandit almost managed to take him out, Lynx saved his ass. Meili followed up with a clean shot to the skull, but before they could catch their breath, more bandits poured out, weapons drawn. Kenichi, still high, had no fear. He summoned his backhoe, turned on the headlights, and charged at the bandits like it was Black Friday at Walmart. The bandits, blinded and confused, had no idea what to do. Seeing the opportunity, the beast folk launched a counterattack, slicing through enemies left and right. Moore's Paw showed off his wolf skills, cutting enemies like butter. Meanwhile, Kenichi, still in Mario Kart mode, was running dudes over and laughing like a maniac. Kenichi, in full bulldozer mode, tears through the walls of the ruins, trying to find the cell where Pramila is trapped. He hears screams and sees a bright light burst from the hole, making the purple-hated girl think she's staring at God himself. Despite all the chaos, Kenichi still can't find Pramila and starts to panic. That's when Shaga steps in, holding a woman hostage. To prove he's not messing around, Shaga rips part of the woman's clothing and taunts her, saying he would have had his fun earlier if he'd known it would come to this. Meanwhile, Kenichi doesn't give up. Without showing his hand, he asks Meili to watch where he's pointing his laser sight at Shaga. The cat girl, relying on her keen senses, catches the hint. Kenichi plans to blind the guy with the light so Meili can take him down with her bow. As promised, the laser hits Shaga right in the eyes. He drops Pramila, and just as the hostage makes a run for it, Meili's arrow pierces Shaga's shoulder, giving the woman time to dive into Kenichi's arms. But Shaga's not done. He lunges to throw his sword, but a mysterious wind blows him back, right into Meili's arrow. She nails him dead center in the forehead, making sure he can't get up. Pramila finally reaches Kenichi, wrapping him in a hug. The man, maybe thanks to the mysterious nut he ate earlier, feels an overwhelming urge to grab her, but he forces himself to hold back. With the rescue mission a success, Nyanji rushes back to camp to inform Anima of the good news. Kenichi, playing the role of the hero, buys clothes for the freed women and arranges for a bath for everyone. He even gives Pramila a pair of scissors to cut the young girl's hair, which causes one woman to forget her trauma for a moment and ask if she could sell the scissors in her company. As she's talking, she accidentally drops her towel and runs off, embarrassed. After bathing and getting dressed, the youngest girl introduces herself as Anmone and gives Kenichi a letter from the shady nobleman Shiga, who was behind the kidnapping. Back at camp, Inama is overcome with emotion upon seeing everyone safe, having feared the worst. She notices the child among them and remarks that her daughter would have been the same age if she'd still been alive. Kenichi had no idea Inama had a daughter, and she explains, with a heavy heart, that the girl died during an epidemic. Exhausted from the day's events, the freed women are put to bed, and the group plans to head back to Dahlia the next morning. They still have the grim task of disposing of the bandits' bodies, but for now, Kenichi falls asleep next to Primula and Enmanon, finally getting a moment of rest after the chaos.
As the morning sun rises, Kenichi drives everyone back to town. The villagers gather eagerly, curious to see if he has succeeded. As his truck rolls into the town square, Primula jumps out and runs straight into her father's arms, overwhelmed with relief and joy. While they reunite, Mallow notices Primula's dress. It looks expensive. Curious, he asks about it, and she proudly explains that Kenichi gave it to her. This reminds Mallow that he hasn't properly thanked Kenichi yet. Walking up to him, he expresses his deep gratitude for rescuing Primula. He also asks if Kenichi managed to recover the stolen goods from Shaga and his gang. Kenichi nods, assuring him that everything is safely stored in his item box. However, the loot isn't what one might expect. Inside Kenichi's item box is a collection of severed heads. Before they left the ruins, the beast folk informed him that to claim the bounty he needed proof, specifically Shaga's head. Since Shaga and his gang were infamous criminals, a hefty reward had been placed on them. Carrying the heads around would have been disgusting and unbearable due to the smell, so Kenichi had no choice but to store them in his item box. He didn't enjoy doing it, but it had to be done. Along with the heads, he also retrieved all the stolen goods, including a bag of 100 gold coins and other valuable items. Additionally, he freed the women imprisoned by Shaga. Unsure of what they wanted to do next, he asked if they wished to return to their villages. Some did, but others had no home left. Shaga had burned their villages and killed their families. Understanding their pain, Kenichi invited them to Dahlia, where they could start anew. The women gladly accepted. One of them, Anemone, caught Kenichi's attention. When he asked where she was from, she revealed that her village, Orup, was 800 kilometers away, a long journey if she wanted to return. However, Anemone had no interest in going back. Her own people had sold her into slavery. Instead, she chose to follow Kenichi to Dahlia, and he welcomed her. After ensuring the rescued women reached safety, Kenichi went to the guild to claim the bounty. When he pulled out Shaga's severed head, the receptionist was horrified. But that was just the start. Kenichi had 50 more. As he kept retrieving them from his storage, the guild staff braced themselves for the tedious job of verifying each one. While waiting, a wizard approached Kenichi, warning him that his rare summoning magic and massive item box could attract unwanted attention from nobles. If they learned about his abilities, things could get difficult. Kenichi understood the risk and decided to stay low-key. Meanwhile, Norse Pole, another ally, told Kenichi he was heading to meet Lord Asclepius to expose the corrupt nobles who had secretly backed Shaga. With that, he bid Kenichi farewell. After hours of counting, the guild finally calculated Kenichi's bounty, 861 gold coins in total. Kenichi wanted to split the reward fairly among everyone, but Anema refused a share. She felt she hadn't done anything to earn it, as her life was never in danger. However, she did have one request. She wanted to take care of Anemone like her own daughter. Kenichi trusted her intentions and agreed. But just minutes later, in an unfortunate twist, Anema somehow lost the child. That night, instead of heading back into the forest, Kenichi decided to stay at Azalea's inn. Before going inside, he left some food for the bobcat that had protected him during the mission and thanked it. As soon as Azalea saw Kenichi, she lit up with excitement. It had been a while since their last meeting. She had heard rumors that he had single-handedly wiped out a gang of bandits and asked if it was true. Not wanting extra attention, Kenichi downplayed the story. Then, with a teasing smile, Azalea reminded him of a past conversation. Apparently, he had once promised to make her his lover once he became successful. Kenichi quickly denied making such a promise and instead asked for a room for the night. Amused, Azalea told him his usual room was available. Kenichi barely made it upstairs before collapsing onto his bed, exhausted. But later that night, someone sneaked into his room. He felt her warmth under the covers. It was Azalea, of course. He already knew what she wanted, but he was way too tired. Even so, she was persistent, pressing closer since she didn't get to see him often. Just as things were about to escalate, they suddenly noticed a small figure watching them. That killed the mood instantly. Azalea sighed and went back to her own room, while Anemone, the unexpected guest, ended up sleeping beside Kenichi. The next morning, Kenichi figured Anima must be worried sick, so he went to her shop, but she was nowhere to be found. Since he had errands to run, he continued with his day. He sold the swords and shields from Shaga's camp at the weapons store, traded the rest of the valuables to Malo's company for 35 gold, and hauled the furniture to the old man's shop for another 12 gold. Once the loot was divided, each person walked away with 12 gold. With his tasks done, Kenichi finally headed home, with Anemone following. She was amazed by how beautiful his house was, but she was even more surprised to find Anima already inside, waiting. Anima had been worried but figured Kenichi would bring Anemone home sooner or later. However, when she reached out to take Anemone home, the girl refused. She wanted to stay with Kenichi instead. Anima, confused, tried to convince her otherwise, but Anemone had made up her mind. Seeing no point in forcing her, Anima simply told her she was always welcome to visit. As they walked inside, Kenichi asked why she wanted to stay with him so badly. Anemone shrugged. "Because you give me really tasty food." And just like that, Kenichi had an unexpected housemate. They took a bath together, then settled in for the night. It would take some getting used to, but at Anemone's age, it wasn't unusual for him to have a daughter. As he drifted off to sleep, he remained unaware of the shadowy figures watching his house from the darkness. 2 weeks later, a lot had changed. Thanks to his role in the battle against Shaga, Norsepol had been granted the title of Baron, along with some land. Rumors spread that he was now looking for a wife. Meanwhile, Kenichi's bicycle idea, which Malo and Primula had once mocked, had gained popularity. Realizing their mistake, they paid Kenichi 5 gold for the design, and bicycles were now becoming common across the country. Despite all the good news, Kenichi couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He ignored it for now and went to the guild to receive his final bounty payout. After getting the money, he divided it up, even giving Anama a small share, despite her protests. She reluctantly accepted and, in return, handed him an apple. Just as things seemed to be settling down, that eerie feeling returned. This time, it wasn't just his imagination. He spotted a cloaked figure tailing him. Grabbing Anemone's hand, Kenichi tried to lose them in the crowd, but more figures appeared, blocking his escape. They backed him into an alley where a carriage was conveniently parked. The cloaked men stepped closer. "Our boss wants to meet you. Come quietly, and we won't have to hurt you." Kenichi weighed his options. Surrender was not one of them. Pretending to comply, he waited for the right moment, then suddenly pulled out firecrackers from his inventory and threw them. The loud pops and flashing sparks startled the kidnappers. Taking advantage of the chaos, Kenichi and Anemone dove under the carriage and created some distance. He pulled out a crossbow and aimed. "Take another step and I'll shoot." With no long-range weapons, the cloaked men were forced to retreat. Just then, Malo's carriage rolled up. He had heard the commotion and offered them a ride. As they traveled, Kenichi explained what had happened. Malo suspected this was the work of a noble from the anti-monarchy faction and suggested Kenichi seek protection from Lord Asclepius. Kenichi considered it but hesitated. If he got involved with nobility, they might start expecting taxes from him, and he absolutely hated taxes. Maybe leaving the city altogether would be the better choice. After returning home, Malo tells Primula that Kenichi has already left town. She's upset. They didn't even get a chance to properly thank him. Thanks to his bicycle idea, their business grew so much that the local lord even granted them a family name. They owe Kenichi a huge debt, and she refuses to let him leave without repaying it. Determined, Primula decides to go after him and spend as much time with him as possible. She once confessed her feelings to Kenichi and was rejected, but after he risked his life to save her from being kidnapped, she's convinced he must care about her in some way. If that's true, surely he'd wait for her, right? Unfortunately, by the time she reaches his place, Kenichi is already gone, house and all. Meanwhile, Kenichi is cruising down the road on his new motorcycle, feeling confident enough that he only bought a helmet for Anemone, not himself. As he rides, he spots a familiar face and pulls up beside Fuyu to say hello. It's been a while since they last met, so they chat for a bit. Fuyu is surprised to learn that Kenichi became a merchant, invented the bicycle, and even has a daughter now. When asked where they're headed, Kenichi admits he doesn't know yet. They're just traveling for now. Wishing them luck, Fuyu watches as Kenichi and Anemone speed off toward the horizon. After days on the road, they've traveled about 100 kilometers from Dahlia and are now just 6 kilometers away from a town called Estrantia. For now, though, they've been camping out, enjoying the slow and peaceful life Kenichi always wanted. But since he has Anemone with him, he knows they'll need a proper home soon. To scout ahead, Kenichi launches a drone, spotting a lake downstream with a strange ship on the other side. Deciding to check it out, he and Anemone ride along the river until they reach a beautiful lakeside area. The view is perfect, so Kenichi lets Anemone and the bobcat play in the water while he clears the land. Then, from his item box, he pulls out his house and sets it up. As they settle in, Kenichi realizes he never named the bobcat. After thinking for a bit, he decides to call it Vel. That night, while Anemone practices reading and writing, she picks it up quickly, except for math, which gives her trouble. Meanwhile, Kenichi looks for a cheaper way to get diesel. He's been making his own fuel using kerosene and additives, but he remembers hearing about biodiesel from cooking oil. Curious but clueless, he buys a few books on the subject. Anemone, finishing her homework, asks if she can read with him. Kenichi warns that the book is written in his homeland's language, but Anemone insists on learning. Amused by her determination, he buys her a children's book in that language, and she eagerly starts studying it. The next day, while camouflaging the house, Kenichi hears rustling in the bushes. Instinctively, he loads his crossbow, preparing for an attack, only to find Miley standing there. Having been heartbroken when Kenichi vanished without a word, Miley tracked his scent all the way here. Now that she's found him, she declares that she's staying. Kenichi doesn't mind, and Anemone quickly warms up to her, so Miley officially joins their little family. During dinner, Kenichi asks if anything interesting happened in Dahlia since he left. Miley doesn't have much news, but she does mention that Norse Ball proposed to Primula and they're getting married soon. Kenichi is happy for them, but knows he won't be able to attend the wedding. Later that night, after their usual bath, Anemone shows Miley the Japanese book Kenichi gave her. Miley, though unable to read it, enjoys the illustrations. This gives Kenichi an idea. Books are rare and valuable in this world, so picture books could be a great business opportunity. Since Japanese folktales might not interest the locals, he asks Anemone and Miley if they know any legends from this world. They eagerly share their stories, and one about the forest elves catches Kenichi's interest. Inspired, he starts drawing illustrations for it, then buys an ink press to make copies. The first 2 books go to Anemone and Miley, who love them. However, their peaceful night is interrupted when Kenichi spots a boat approaching the shore. Sensing possible danger, he tells the girls to stay inside while he grabs his crossbow and demands to know why the men are here. One of them, a beast man, quickly reassures him. They're from Santanka, a village across the lake. Seeing someone settle here, they came to check if he was a bandit. Kenichi lowers his weapon and explains he's just a traveling merchant. At that moment, Vel walks up beside him. The beast man is shocked. Bobcats don't usually bond with humans. If this one trusts Kenichi, then he must be a good guy. Relaxing, the man introduces himself as Crouton, and Kenichi does the same. To clear any doubts, Kenichi gives Crouton and Nyanez a tour of his house. Everything seems normal, so Crouton apologizes for barging in and prepares to leave. Before he goes, he notices the books Kenichi made and asks to buy one for his daughter. Kenichi agrees. Once they leave, Kenichi and the girls have lunch together. Anemone stays inside reading while Kenichi heads into the forest to gather medicinal herbs. Miley follows, hoping to get some alone time with him. Since Anemone is busy, Kenichi can't refuse. So, well, you can guess what happens next. Later, Kenichi returns to his latest project, biodiesel from used cooking oil. It's risky, but if it works, he'll have a fuel source without breaking the bank. Wearing a hazmat suit for safety, he starts the process, but the heat gets unbearable. He takes a quick dip in the river before continuing. Then comes the big moment. Testing the fuel, he pours some into the generator, holds his breath, and nothing explodes. Success! Soon after, Kenichi, Miley, Anemone, and Tao head to Estrantia. Their first stop? the Adventurers Guild. Kenichi registers as both an adventurer and a merchant, while Miley signs up as an adventurer. The receptionist processes their IDs but suddenly panics. Kenichi is the guy who defeated Shaga. He tells her to keep it quiet and she quickly finishes the registration. Later, they grab some food at the town square, but it tastes awful because the spice syndicate controls the spice trade. Kenichi fixes this by sharing his own spice mix with the girls. While eating, he notices some shady guys with wild Jojo Mayo hair lurking around. At the same time, he spots Crouton and a little girl heading into an alley. Something feels off, but he decides to mind his own business. As they explore, Kenichi visits an old magic shop and buys a device that separates water from wine, realizing it could help refine his biodiesel safely. Anemone also finds a magical book she likes. The shopkeeper says it's a grimoire, but they can't take it home yet. It needs to be registered first. As they leave, they bump into Nyanes, who seems to be in a rush. Kenichi gets a bad feeling but doesn't act on it. Later, they see Crouton and his daughter being attacked in an alley. Kenichi jumps in, using fireworks to scare the thugs away. Crouton reveals that he once worked as a government official and took down many members of the Spice Syndicate. Now, they're after him. Days pass, and Crouton's family often visits. But one day, Mary doesn't show up. Instead, a frantic Crouton arrives, begging for help. Mary is sick with chicory fever, a disease that's fatal without treatment. The only cure is a rare flower deep in the forest. Kenichi, Crouton, and Nyanes set out to find it, but little do they know the Spice Syndicate is watching, and they're ready to strike now that Kenichi and Crouton are gone.